everybody. My name is John Britton. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Workbrew. We're very happy to be sponsoring MacDevOps. This is my second time here, and actually last year when I came here for the first time, it was the first event that I attended, as part of Workbrew. So we were pre 1.0. We were kind of in a private beta. I talked to a lot of people. I got a really good feedback from everybody here, and we took that. We worked really hard for the last year on the product, and we have a lot to show. So I'm going to give you a bit of a demo, an overview of what Workbrew is and kind of what we've built so far. And then, I'll be here for the whole conference, so please come and find me. Talk to me about anything package management, anything about Homebrew or about Workbrew, or Mac stuff as well. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, first I'm going to go over a little bit about Homebrew, the open source package manager. Then we'll talk about Workbrew. I'll give you a demo, and then we'll have some time for Q&A, and I hope that that'll be a lively discussion. Usually after I give one of these talks in a room of people full of Mac admins, they always have things that they want to know more about and challenge. So my name's John. My co-founders Mike and Vanessa and the team at Workbrew are all Homebrew experts. So I've been a contributor to Homebrew for over 10 years. We have a handful of maintainers on the team that contribute, and Mike is also the project leader of Homebrew, one of our co-founders. Vanessa's on the project leadership committee, and if you're not familiar, Homebrew is an open source kind of independent nonprofit organization, so it's kind of separate from us. So what is Homebrew exactly? Well, boiled down, it's kind of the app store for software developers. On macOS, it's kind of the de facto package manager. It's open source. It came up around the time that GitHub became popular. One of the main reasons why Homebrew was so successful was that packages are defined in a really easy-to-use domain-specific language, and submitting changes to packages is really simple using pull requests on GitHub. Anybody can do it. There are thousands of contributors to Homebrew, and it's effectively an industry standard, close to 16 years now that it's been around. It looks something like this. You open up your terminal, you type brew install, and then whatever you want. And somehow, magically, it appears on your machine, and you're off to the races as a software dev. It has close to 15,000 packages, from open source software, libraries, languages, IDEs, to closed source desktop applications like Zoom and Slack, Visual Studio Code. And you can also use it to install internal software. So custom CLI tools that you might use within your development environment, data analysis tools, or other odds and ends that you want to distribute in a standardized way across Mac, Linux, and also Windows under WSL. Homebrew is everywhere. It's trusted by tens of millions of developers every day. It's estimated to be installed on 35 million devices. And as I just mentioned, it's on Windows and Linux as well. Windows on WSL, and Linux you can run with Linux Brew. But not everything is, amazing in Homebrew land. There are a few problems when it comes to using Homebrew in an enterprise environment. By design, Homebrew is a single-player tool. So you install it on one device, it's used by one developer, they control everything about it, they install what they need. There's no kind of way to manage it or gain visibility around what's going on. So what's a company to do, or what's an organization to do with regards to Homebrew? Well, there are kind of three strategies that we see over and over and over again as we talk to companies and organizations that have Homebrew in the real world. The first is to do nothing. You might have a rule that says Homebrew is not officially supported. Please don't use it. And everybody looks the other way, and everybody goes and installs Homebrew and installs lots of packages, and we just kind of ignore it and pretend it's not there. Don't recommend, but this is the most common solution to the problem. The second, kind of less common, but still pretty common, is what I like to call informed trust. So companies, as they get more and more mature, they might develop some documentation internally around how to install Brew, what packages to install by default, how to evaluate a package that you might be bringing into the environment, and kind of if there are any processes, especially in a regulated industry, around evaluating software before you install it, what those processes are. But it really relies on trust. You teach your team, you trust them to do the right thing, and more often than not, they'll do the right thing, but there's no enforcement and there's no way to validate that. And then lastly, this is the least common, but it's, it happens enough, especially in very large companies, which is to roll your own solution. So I could name a bunch of companies that you probably know in the Fortune 100 that have entire teams of people dedicated to manage their own internal forks of Homebrew. And what they're trying to do with those internal forks is to guarantee that every package that enters the environment is somehow scanned or validated or otherwise controlled. This is very expensive, and it's also very brittle. Apple releases a new OS, everything breaks. Homebrew releases a new version, everything breaks. You have to update it. And so I don't really recommend that, but it is a possibility. And this is where Workbrew comes in. So with many years of experience working in DevTools space, a team of experienced Homebrew contributors and maintainers, we set out to try and solve these problems, for companies. And it's essentially enterprise-ready Homebrew. It's loved by developers. It gives them the exact same experience that they're used to. Brew, install whatever you want. You can search for things, but security gives it the okay because they have visibility, they have remote management capabilities, and they have the ability to set policies and do security and compliance type tasks. So I want to drill down a little bit into the functionality of Workbrew. First and foremost, we have a free plan. So we built a really powerful free plan for Workbrew with the goal of making sure everybody knows what's going on in their environments. So if you go and sign up for Workbrew, you can install on unlimited devices with unlimited users and gain full visibility into every package that's installed on every device, including all the version information and everything there. And that's all kind of under this umbrella of visibility. How do I know what's installed? When was it installed? What version is installed? All that kind of stuff. And so we give you a centralized way, one kind of dashboard that shows you all that information. Once you know what's going on in your fleet, there are definitely going to be things that you want to fix. There might be packages that are installed that you want to remove. There might be out-of-date things that you want to upgrade. You might want to set up defaults to have easier onboarding for your team or your developers. So we have a lot of functionality around remote management. Anything that you can do with Brew on one device, with Workbrew you can do on any number of devices, whether it's an individual device, a targeted device group, or every device in the fleet. And you can run commands and you can install things, and it's very, very easy to use. And then lastly is security and compliance. And this is the area that, especially our enterprise, regulated companies, a lot in the financial sector, insurance, healthcare, come to us and they say, hey, we have these laws or we have these certifications that we have to meet. We need to be able to patch every vulnerability in a set amount of time. We need to be able to pre-approve software before it gets installed on endpoints. And so we built a suite of functionality around security and compliance as well, so that you, as an IT admin or as a security professional, can kind of set the guardrails of how Brew is used at your organization and keep tabs on it and make sure that it's essentially managed Homebrew. What I found from talking to folks in your positions, IT and security professionals, is that they generally don't want to make life harder for their developers or for their end users. They want to give them all the tools they need to do their jobs, but also make sure that they're ticking the box around security, around visibility, and around compliance. And so what we've built is essentially a way to give the developers and give the end users of Brew an experience that's as close to Homebrew as possible, while also giving you the visibility and the security that you need. We also have gone over the last year and built integrations with all the major MDM providers. You can install and deploy Workbrew with any MDM, but we've also built a tighter integration where we can do device group syncing, inventory syncing, and essentially make it a very, very quick setup process where you can import all of your devices into Workbrew, get all of the information, and start managing them. We have guides. If you check out this URL, each of these MDMs, we have a step-by-step guide on how to deploy Workbrew with that MDM. And then I wanted to jump into a little bit of a demo. So what I've got here, this is the Workbrew console. And I'm going to start with a little bit about the architecture of how Workbrew is built. The foundation of Workbrew is Homebrew, the open source package manager. We don't have a private fork. We don't have any kind of custom version of what's going on in the Homebrew ecosystem. We built everything on top of Homebrew. So whenever we find that there is something we need in Homebrew, we'll make that as an upstream contribution to the open source project and share it with the world. Case in point, we built a feature that allows you to block specific packages in Homebrew. The way that we implemented that was in the Homebrew Open Source Package Manager, we added configuration options that anyone can use around which packages are prohibited within the environment. Then with that API, in the Workbrew console and the Workbrew ecosystem, you can set those configuration options and enforce them so they can't be changed. So it's kind of a bridge between the open source world and the managed world. Workbrew is essentially the management plane, or an orchestration layer on top of many instances of Homebrew throughout your organization. On top of that open source, Homebrew package or Homebrew project, we have an installer, which is a PKG file that you can drop into any MDM and install really easily. A lightweight agent that reports on inventory, what's installed on the devices, what versions, and lastly, this console. This is the dashboard. It gives you a quick at-a-glance view of everything that's going on in your fleet. From the devices page, you can see all of the devices, in your fleet, and then you can say, for example, find a particular device and drill down. And you can see on that device every single package that's installed, what version's installed, when it was installed, if it's up to date or not, anything like that. This is really useful for troubleshooting a particular device, doing an incident response, or some kind of auditing that you need to do for compliance reasons. But more often than not, what our IT admins want to see is this packages view, which is kind of the summary of the whole fleet. It's every package that's installed fleet-wide, and then the impact that it has. So for example, you can see the GH package is installed on 7 devices. I can click that and I can see which devices have that package installed, when it was installed, how it's being used, etc. Anything that's out of date, I can just one-click to upgrade it across the entire fleet. Very easy to do. Further on the visibility front, we have taps. In Homebrew speak, a tap is a repository of packages. The Homebrew core and Homebrew cask taps contain the 15,000 packages that people think of as official Homebrew. But from here you can see a list of arbitrary third-party taps that are in use within the organization. And this is a lot of visibility that companies have no idea about. Because essentially with Homebrew, you can install arbitrary third-party code via an arbitrary third-party tap that anybody can create with anything you want in it. And without something like this, you have no visibility in how that's being used. Lastly, you can get some visibility into how brew is being used on the devices, brew commands, and then open source licensing. So these are all the licenses that are in effect and how they're being used. Everything that I showed you so far is all part of the free plan. So you just install Workbrew, you get all that visibility. On the paid plans, you can do remote management, which is running commands, setting up defaults, installing packages, upgrade, anything to write action is going to be part of that. So the first thing I'll show you is default packages. With the default packages feature, you can create something called a brew file. A brew file is a configuration file that describes all the packages you want to have installed on a machine. You could come in here and you could edit it, in code. It's a standard file format you can use with Homebrew, or you can use our visual editor to search for things like Python. And you can find the exact version of Python you want to install on the devices. Choose 3.9. You could say, for example, I want to install Visual Studio Code, choose that. I could also add, for example, Zoom US, right, or Slack, right, whatever you want. You can search for all those packages. When you set this up and save it, you can assign it to a group of devices, all devices, or an individual device. So I might want to install all of this for my engineers, save this. Now whenever a new device is provisioned using Apple Business Manager, it connects to your MDM, Workbrew is installed by default, and all the default packages are on the device, zero touch. No involvement whatsoever. So it's really, really powerful. Under the hood, the way that this works is something called brew commands. And a brew command does what it says on the tin. It's just like you're sitting at the terminal, brew install, whatever, brew upgrade. But you can do this across the whole fleet. So I could say brew upgrade Python, right? Just like you would normally expect. And then I can choose, I want to run this on my engineering devices, and I want to run it on a schedule weekly. So I want to upgrade Python every week. Or I might want to say whenever it's out of date. So this is effectively a way to turn on auto updates for individual packages across the fleet. Or lastly, whenever a vulnerability is found, automatically patch it. So this is something that's really useful for teams that are trying to make sure they minimize their vulnerabilities and they have a remediation plan in place for whenever they're found. The last kind of area of functionality is around security and compliance. So we have a vulnerabilities function that lets you get alerts of any new vulnerabilities when they're discovered. We'll send you a webhook, we'll send you an email, we'll send you a Slack notification, and then it will show up on this page with a link to the CVE database telling you what the vulnerability is and giving you a one-click upgrade. Just click this button, it'll generate a command that will fix the thing. Oh, I don't know what that is. I don't know what happened there. But anyways, you click upgrade, it will upgrade it for you. And then lastly, we have this functionality around policies. You can do things like block specific packages. So we have a lot of customers who say we want to prevent data exfiltration, we only want sanctioned VPNs to be used. So I might say I want to block OpenVPN, right? So I can search and add that to the block list. If a user in my environment tries to install OpenVPN, they'll get a message that says, sorry, this has been prohibited by your administrator. Please go to this Slack channel and get help. Fill out a Jira ticket, whatever it is that you want to configure it to say. But there are many different VPNs, in the Brew ecosystem. So I might just search for VPN, see a ton of results here, and then add them all. I want to block all the VPNs. So this is really useful for making sure that anything that's outside of the scope of your organization's use cases can be blocked. And really the way we see this being used is in highly regulated companies where the alternative is just no brew allowed. Under the hood with policies, the way that this works is using something called brew configurations. And if you go to the Homebrew documentation and you look at the environment section, you'll find a list of close to 100 different configuration options for open source Homebrew. And since this was designed as a single player solution, the idea is that the end user developer would set all of these settings for themselves. With Workbrew, you have the ability to set these at the company level or at the group level and enforce them so they can't be changed. So one example of something that companies in regulated industries do quite often is they'll set this Homebrew artifact domain and set it to artifactsexample.com. What this would do is it would go out to all of the devices in my fleet and essentially make it so that when Brew goes out to the internet to fetch any resources, be it binaries or source code, rather than going to the official Brew locations, it will go to an internal mirror within my VPN. This doesn't give you a ton on the security front in terms of, you're going to get the exact same binaries. But for companies that have compliance requirements, this is really useful because they can have an audit log of every single asset as it enters their environment. And we have customers that use this as a way to say, when a new asset enters the environment, we can run an intellectual property scan, we can run a licensing scan, we can run a vulnerability scan, make a checksum, have a person sign off on it, and then keep that record for 5 years because the regulators say we have to. So this is really useful on that front. So that's kind of the high-level overview of everything in Workbrew. I'll be around, for the rest of the time that the conference is here. I'll be happy to show you this, walk you through setting it up, things like that. But before I go, I just had a couple more things that I wanted to share from my slides. So everything in the Workbrew console is also available via an API. And this is something that we released a few months ago, and it's been really pretty helpful for a lot of our customers. But our goal is that anything you can do with ClickOps in the UI, you can also do in an automated fashion via an API. And it's really easy to use, and it has endpoints like devices. You can get a list of all the devices, get information about what's going on with them, what version of Brew is installed, what's the operating system, things like that. You can get lists of formula, which are source code-based packages. These are usually like your developer dependencies, OpenSSL, curl, stuff that Homebrew has the source and builds the binary for you. So you can see all of those packages. Casks are also packages, but these are third-party binaries. So like Google Chrome, we don't get the source code of Google Chrome and build it for you. We get that directly from Google. There's a vulnerabilities API, so you can build automations around what to do when a vulnerability is detected. We'll send you a webhook. You can go and use the vulnerabilities API to get the severity, what packages it impacts. You can look at the devices that are affected by that vulnerability. You could then use an MDM endpoint to quarantine the device. We have customers who use the API to say, if there's more than a certain number of vulnerabilities on a device, don't allow them to connect to the VPN. Or if the vulnerability is over 21 days old, don't allow them to connect to the VPN. And last, maybe not last, but brew commands. Anything that you want to do that's a write action, you can do via this API. I don't recommend it, but we've seen people using like self-service in their MDM to then trigger actions in Workbrew. So they're in a transitional period where they're saying like, we used to package everything and put it into our MDM as individual packages. Now we're using Brew as the way to install those packages, but our users are still used to using self-service. So you can kind of bridge that gap a little bit until you move them fully over. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to take those. And yeah, do we have a microphone if there's anybody who has any?
Is that working?
There we go.
So I was curious about software provenance. Like, I would like to know that the code that Brew installs has been built by a service and not a human, and that comes from a very specific Git tag. So I can go all the way back and see that this code was built automatically, and a human has not touched it, and it's now on this machine, and I have no, so I know I can know. I have more trust that no one's done something nefarious along the way, and a developer or some human has filled with the binary. Because I don't know if this is something that maybe you're working on or plan to work on, because that would be a great thing, I think, for security, I guess, to have.
Yeah, so that's a great point. This is something that actually exists today. Homebrew has a functionality called build attestations. And the way that it works is for binary packages, for source code based packages, so for formula, what happens is, the packager goes to the Homebrew open source project, they make a pull request to package, let's say, OpenSSL. They make the instructions, which are essentially a recipe for how Brew should get the source code for OpenSSL, create the binary, and then deliver the binary to the machine. In the Homebrew open source project, you have the ability to build from source. So if you pass a certain flag into the Brew command, it will fetch the source and build it locally and install it. And in fact, that's how Brew used to work in the early days. It would build everything from source on the machine. But for speed and other, kind of performance reasons, what we do now is the Homebrew project, when that change is made on the package, they are all running on GitHub, so it's using GitHub Actions. A GitHub action fires off, it goes off, it finds the source code according to the formula, it builds the binary, and then it saves that binary in an asset host. And then when you go and install OpenSSL using Brew, it actually pulls that binary from the asset host. You're downloading a binary and installing a binary. It's very fast. What's really nice, Homebrew released a feature in collaboration with some new functionality from GitHub on GitHub Actions and this security auditing firm, Trail of Bits. There's a couple blog posts about it. But essentially, you can GitHub will sign artifacts that are built using GitHub Actions using a key that only they can access, and none of the open source maintainers can access it. And so what this means is you can effectively find the audit trail of the GitHub action that used a specific version of the formula definition to go and get the source code, run on a GitHub Actions instance that was controlled by GitHub, then create the binary, and then that binary has an attestation with it. And there's a functionality in Homebrew called Homebrew Verify Attestations, which is currently off by default, but in the Brew configurations I was showing you can turn that on, and I expect that will be on by default at some point in the future. So it's a very good question. Other questions? We got one back here.
Is there a way that you can set version pinning for what gets installed on developers' machines?
This is a tricky one.
Yes, it is.
So Homebrew, as designed, is what's called a rolling release package manager. What that means is that every time a new version of a package becomes available, it gets released to everybody as soon as the upstream vendor makes it available. This is in contrast to other operating system package managers. Like if you look at Ubuntu and apt, they have releases for their operating system. When a release happens, all of the major versions are pinned, and only minor releases get added, like security patches or bug fixes. In Homebrew world, we don't do that. What happens is, as soon as something's available, it gets made the default. This is nice for a lot of reasons, because you don't have to wait for the next major release of the operating system or anything like that, but it's bad when you want to do pinning. So today, in Homebrew, there's no way to install an old version of something. So it's just not possible to do what you're asking. There is a functionality in Homebrew called pin, which allows you to keep a version and prevent it from being upgraded. So let's say you're working on a project, you install a particular version of a dependency, and you pin that version, and the new version's released, it will not be upgraded. But you would need to pin it, and once it's upgraded, there's no way to go back. Or if you, for example, have a developer who joins the team after the new release, there would be no way for them to install it by default. Now, we've heard this question over and over from our customers, like, how do I do this? How can we help? And really, it's less about, when they're asking us about it, it's less about saying, I want to run this version in perpetuity. It's more of like, I want to have a controlled release of the upgrade cycle within my environment. I want to say, when the new version comes available, it's going to be 2 weeks, we're going to vet it, we're going to run it on a small number of machines, and then we're going to roll it out. And so we have some functionality in the pipeline internally that's available under private beta to work with some of our existing customers on, but it's not part of the Homebrew package manager. It's just a Workbrew thing. Does that answer?
Yeah, I mean,
it's a very
we have run into that problem, right? New engineer starts, installs new version of library, builds container, boom, everything gets blown up because one function of that new package just change something.
So I fully intend for us to help solve that problem. And if you have it today and you want to try some things out, like come talk to me and I'll be happy to work with you on it. Are there other folks with questions around? Put up a hand if you have any. We got the mic down here. Oh, okay.
Hello. You said that it can import stuff from existing MDMs, and you gave some examples. I saw like Jamf and Fleet and Simple MDM and some other things. Like, is that a kind of continuous integration based on just like the MDM's own API, or how does that work?
So there's two main things that we pull from the MDM right now. The first is device information. So in order to keep things easy for the user, there's no user account. So all your devs, when they use Workbrew, they don't have to log into anything. They don't have to do any authentication. It just works like normal brew. They just run the brew command, and they would never know that it was any different than normal homebrew. But what that means is that we don't really know a whole lot about your users. So when you go into the console and you view them, we just show serial numbers. But if you connect your MDM, and your MDM has your serial numbers, and those devices also have names, we'll sync all that data over. You don't have to do anything manually, and it will all show up nice and easy. With all the information you see here, right? Now, similarly, you can organize in most MDMs. There's like a device group functionality, so we can create groups by taking devices and adding them to an existing group or creating a new group or whatever you want to do. But it's better if you have an MDM and you already have groups set up. We'll sync your device groups over. So we're using simple MDM here. So you can see there's a group called default with 5 devices and engineers. There's 5 devices. And whenever a new device is provisioned in simple MDM, it'll automatically be added to that group, and any default packages associated with that group will automatically be installed.
And that's just Workbrew, again, like just using the MDM's own API to
Exactly.
like periodically query and reconcile whatever's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we use a read-only token, read-only API connection to your MDM. It's very easy to set up. I think also on that, like kind of related to that I didn't talk about before, is something that we call access modes. So we have this thing here. If I show you the dashboard, my internet's not working correctly. There we go. Go to the dashboard. So we have this thing here, access mode violations. A lot of our customers, when they come to us, one of the main goals that they have is they say, all of our devs have sudo access. We really want to make sure that they're on standard user accounts. If not on standard user accounts, we want to use a PAM tool, so that they only have sudo when needed. And one of the big blockers to making that transition is that for many developer dependencies, you need sudo access, including for Homebrew, to use it effectively. With Workbrew, the way that it's built, the way it's installed in the machine, you don't need to be a sudo user. You can just be a standard user with no special privileges, and everything works perfectly. We added this functionality in the last month or so called access modes, which lets you, on a per workspace, per group, or per device basis, set an expected access mode. Meaning, we expect that the user on this device is restricted, is standard, or is a pseudo user. And then anything that's out of line with that will be displayed, as an access mode violation. And in those 3 different modes, effectively the way that Brew is used is very different. So in restricted mode, you're essentially using Brew as a centralized software delivery platform that your end user has no interaction with whatsoever. They can't run the brew command, they never see anything related to Homebrew, but you can manage everything in the console, install all the apps, all the dependencies you want, and it'll all just work for them. In standard mode, this is what we typically see companies putting their developers in. They have a standard user account on the device. All they need to do is add them to a system group called the Workbrew users group, which gives them access to run the brew command on the CLI, and they can do anything that's within policy. So they can install packages, they can uninstall packages, they can upgrade, they can add taps, they can do whatever you let them do, as long as it's not in violation of one of your policies. And then lastly, sudo mode is any user that has sudo privileges, and so they have the same experience, but there's no guarantee that they can't go around the system, right? Like if they have sudo privileges, they can kind of do whatever they want. So yeah, that's a little bit about that. Maybe one more over here. Yeah, we have a hand. Hey.
So if I have users operating in sudo mode that can do whatever, and potentially drift from the configuration that I've set in the Workbrew console. Is there any reconciliation of that in the Workbrew console that I can use to say, hey, all my engineers, I gave them SUA access because they insisted on it. How can I tell if they've drifted from what I want them to have installed?
So what you'll get when that happens is this policy violations alert, and it will give you a list of devices and what policies are in violation. So you can see my device has packages that are installed that have licenses that are AGPL. We blocked HEPL because for testing purposes, but it would show up here. And we also send alerts. So you'll get an email alert, you get a Slack message, and you get a webhook. And in those, the payload would say essentially which policy is violated, which packages are in violation, which devices are in violation. And you could use that with our API to build some automations around it, or you could just log into the console, click some buttons, and remediate that way. Last question, anyone? Or I think we'll wrap it up. All right, and then just before we go, I wanted to show a couple of things. So I have this link here for a Homebrew cheat sheet. This serves a couple purposes. You can get a quick card that shows you all the brew commands, but also if you go to this page and you type in your email, I'll get your contact info and you'll get an email follow-up from me. So if you want to be in contact with me, scan this QR code, fill out the form. That'll go to me, and you'll get the Homebrew cheat sheet, which is a PDF front and back. So I'll leave that for a second. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you very much.